Hi, everybody. How are we doing today? I love it. All right. So my presentation is going to be about keeping it simple. I help a lot of people online with their casting. They'll send me videos, and I try and help them. But certain people will be like, "Well, if my elbow is this way, should I be doing this?" And I'm like, "You're way overthinking it." So we know that basically a Spey cast has three parts. It always has a lift, where we're taking the line off of the water so that it's easy to manipulate it. Whether we're doing any cast, there's always a lift. And then there's the anchored D-loop. If you have an anchor, you're going to have a D-loop. And then there's a forward cast. Now, in order of importance, the lift is the most important. Like anybody who's having issues with their casting, I would encourage you to look at your lift first. And that's what we're going to do to start off the little demonstration here. So the lift. You can see I'm lifting so much line in order to make it easy to move. If I don't lift, it doesn't move, right? So to make it easy to move, we get the back end of the line off the water, and then it's easy to manipulate it into an anchored D-loop. So a couple of things about the lift. If we lift like this, you can see the big sag of line. And then with the rod tip up in the air, there's a couple things that happen. We have to pull with the top hand to get it to move. And also, when the rod tip is up here, the line and everything happens closer to us. So we always want to think about safety in our casting. So if we think of the rod as a lever for the first part of the cast, the lift, the most effective way to use a lever is to move it from the complete opposite end of where we want to, like we're trying to move the line with that end of the lever. So if we use this part as a fulcrum and use the bottom hand to drive things, it's going to be our most efficient way. But if we lift too high, like I stated, there's no efficiency, right? So, like when people send me videos, Jer, and I see this happening, and then they're struggling with the rest of the cast, I always tell them, look at where the rod tip is. So an easy way to think about it is if you pick a point on the far shore, and you point the rod tip there, and then go into your D-loop, or back cast, or whatever you want to call that part, it's going to be much easier. So manipulating the rod tip towards where you want to cast to instead of lifting and looping, like those are like very rounded movements. So the way I teach the casting, it's basically what I call, well, it's called fulcrum casting, is more linear type movements, which is, back and forth is much more efficient than around and looping. So you can see my rod tip, I'm not going up and then around, I'm going that way. Can everybody see that? So a couple of things about the lift also. If I lift too fast, see what happens? Everything is all muddled. The rod tip has sprung up and down, the line is springing up and down. But if I lift nice and slow under control, it makes it easier. So I've sent myself emails or texts or all kinds of stuff once I figured this out. The lift is where you gain control of the line. So I always ask myself, do I have control of the line on my lift? Control. And you'll see that both my hands are going up, and that's how I keep the rod more level. If only my top hand is going up, then we get that problem where the rod tip is too high. So that's the basic part about the lift. Any questions about it? So now that you see it in person, like, is it pretty evident?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Anybody else? You got to help me out, guys.
Where do you stop on the back motion? Where's the
Into the dloop?
Yeah,
Well, that'll be the next part of my little spiel here. So here's the lift, and then you'll see I'm continuing back in one continuous motion. If I do the lift and then go, you can watch my line will sag, right? So I'm losing that tension or control of the line. So it's a continuous motion. Now, as far as going back, the next part, we're going to talk about how we want to push out with the bottom hand to make the line come back. And then to make it go back out, we want to pull. Now, that's different than using our top hand. With our top hand, we pull and then we push. But what happens when you use your top hand, you're only bending about this much of the rod. If you're using your bottom hand to make the line come back and to go out, you're using the whole rod. So as far as going back, you'll see my top hand doesn't move back. By pushing out, my anchor will always land right where I want it to be, which is about a rod tip away at an angle, so right there. So when we talk about an anchor, I'm talking about the point on the line where the leader meets the fly line. Excuse me. So right there, that's my anchor. So the stop is here. The rod tip is here. And that's, if I'm using the top hand or both hands to make the cast, and the rod tip is going back past this point, look at where it's going. It's going down. Whereas if I stop here, it flips the D-loop up on that stop. And there should always be a very positive stop into the back cast. If you're like going back and then keep on moving, you never get that full load. It's a continuous motion cast, but you're not using the full efficiency of the rod loading and unloading. So there's a stop. And once you've made that stop into the back cast, your anchor is predestined. And then I can do things that will help me, like I can get my hands up. Excuse me. So just to recap, nice smooth lift, continuous motion, stop. We have my anchor right where I want it. Now you'll notice something about the line. It's coming underneath the rod tip in the back cast. So some of you might have seen a video that I did where I talked about an oar lock. So my top hand is the oar lock, and the line comes back underneath the rod tip. So an oar lock turns, but an oar lock does not do this. So you see a lot of people, they're trying to make the cast like that. That's where you're putting the line down rather than up. So does that make sense? Okay. Sure can. What do you want to see, the right way or the incorrect way? Okay. So if you watch my rod tip and where the line goes, so it's underneath. So if like the little splashdown that happens when I make that, you'll see that it's about a rod length away. If it's within my rod, then there's a couple of terms for it, but it's called cutting the corner. So if I do this, see where my line is? So we're always trying to be safe by keeping the line away from us. So underneath will help do that. And it's always a sideways movement. It's never back and forth over the top, which is a very key point. It should always be sideways. All right? Any questions on that part? Help me out, people.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. It's like changing the direction. You know.
Okay, so change of direction has nothing to do with my body movement. For me, change of direction is lifting my rod tip to where I want to cast to. And at that point, it's just a switch cast, right? So the body movement that I use, it's not turning at the hips. What I'm doing is say I'm making a right hand cast, this knee here bends. So you see what's happening here? Because if I start rotating, you can over-rotate, you can under-rotate, but this movement here is always going to be very consistent, right? Okay, so say I want to cast to the corner of the bridge over there, right? My swing is over. I can go to there. Whoop. So this part here will be my change of direction. Do you see how I lifted to that point and then I just make a switch cast? Does that answer your question?
Yes.
So you see the lift isn't up and then across. It's at an angle like this. There's a lot of different ways to do it. You know, like you're going to see today all kinds of different demonstrators, but that's just how I do it. So now the forward cast. So you're at what I call the key position, what a lot of people call the key position. Now the added benefit of using the bottom hand to make the line come back to you, is that your bottom hand ends out away from your body. If your bottom hand is here, how do you use it, right? But if it's here, look at how much I can move the rod tip with just the bottom hand. Here, doesn't move at all. So you're going to be using the top hand to drive the cast. So we'll just add this into the scenario. We'll talk our way through it. A lift, line comes under, there's a stop. And then from here, I pull first, and the top hand isn't driving the cast. All it's doing is keeping the rod tip tracking in a straight line, and then stopping the rod tip to release the energy that's stored in the rod. So we'll look at that a couple times. I'll try and do it as slow as possible. And you'll notice that the line is climbing. That's a trajectory. Now, if you're using the top hand to make the cast, you're going to do either a line drive or it's going to be going down. If you're using the bottom hand, you launch it up. Now, if you're trying to throw a baseball or football as far as possible, you want to use gravity to your advantage, so you're always going to try and throw it at that type of trajectory. So I call it free distance. I didn't add any force to that. I hit it the exact same. and it'll shoot just as far. And like, I mean, the biggest mistake you can make on the forward cast is thinking that if you want to shoot more line, you have to hit it harder, because then all you're doing is shocking the rod and so forth. The cast should always be roughly the same. Free distance, that trajectory thing. So any questions?
Where'd you get your hat?
Peaky hats. Overhang, I heard somebody say. Okay, so overhang, you know, you can use a little bit or a lot, and really all it does is, in simple terms, is it tricks the rod in the sense that the further you can get the weight of the line away from the rod tip, the less the rod will bend and thus have less rebound. So we'll just look at as long as you can keep tension, you can use quite a bit of overhang. Like, I don't know how much is there, but if I can keep tension, and that's like when I practice my casting, I'll see how much overhang I can get away with. Like, that was a fair amount of overhang. I have a friend in Ireland, like, he'll regularly cast with like 15 feet of overhang, and his loops are like super tiny, like it's crazy. I'm definitely not that good. Okay, any other questions? Yes, sir?
Closing the loop from tip casting, when you're casting, how to close that loop a little bit easier.
Stop using your top hand to drive it. If you're using the top hand, you can't stop the rod tip. And if you do, you're like snatching the rod. You don't get a clean stop. So that's how you get that weird thing. And also, if you're casting too much over the top, like if you get where the line is catching the line on the way out, you're not sideways enough, right? It's always sideways. Like, even like Tim Arsenault is a great example of somebody casts over the top, right? Like, he's very much like this, or my buddy Duncan is like that also. But the rod tip is still canted slightly to the side. If it's straight on over, it's a casting fault, basically, right? Anybody else?
Do you always have your anchor in front of you?
Yes, yes. So when your anchor is in front of you, the line, you get a good clean anchor, and the line just, all your energy is directed that way. If you get an anchor behind you, when you pull forward, it's going to move that way before it goes forward. Does that make sense? Yeah. Anybody else?
I know you kind of answered it already.
Yeah,
I can stand in a straight line like you're doing and hammer them out.
yeah.
But I stand in a river and change that direction, and it all falls to crap.
Okay, so let's look at what I call body ergonomics. A lot of times we think we're facing where we want to cast to. The only true way, like, you know, let's see here. I think I'm facing there. Am I?
No,
Yeah, I'm facing there, right? So I know, like, when we're wading, the rocks are up and down or whatever, but when I find that I can't do a good change of direction, it's because I'm not facing where I want to cast it. The body works, like, you know, in a certain way. So, like, if we keep our hands within our shoulders or within the box or whatever, if I'm here, where I'm lifted to there, if I'm facing downstream, it's not going to be going where I want to go. So generally, that's the main issue. But again, 95% of the time, it's the lift, right? If you're struggling with your casting, like, that's the first thing you should be looking at. Right, Jeremy? Yeah. Does that answer your question? Yeah, because you know, if we want to throw anything, like, you know, if we want to shoot a bow and arrow or whatever, having our body spacing where we want to cast to, or do that particular thing, that's just how our body works. So if we're not aligned to what we want to do, it's not going to help us. Oh, you're welcome. How are we doing for time, Keith? We're good? 5 minutes? Okay, well, let's look at a snake roll. So I teach a snake roll a very simple way that works with the body ergonomically. So the biggest thing is when I set up, you'll see that my hands are even with my hips or my shoulders. My rod tip is behind me, and my hands are canted. So I'll do a lift, I'll pull and I'll push, pointing the rod tip to where I want to cast to, and then I'll sweep into the back cast. So the back cast is always the same. It doesn't matter what cast we're doing. So the biggest thing that I see with the snake roll is people are extended out here and everything is down there. If we use our body in an ergonomic way, everything lines up a bit easier. So the big one is the lift. There's always a lift. Hands straight up. And you'll notice that I am not creeping forward or backwards. I'm straight up. And from here, that push motion with the bottom hand, what it does is it gets the bottom hand away from the body, so you're going to use it naturally. Up, pull, push, and out. Any questions on the snake roll? I just kind of threw that one in there. Anyway, after lunch, I always do this for Poppy. After lunch, if anybody wants help with their casting, come find me on the river here. And I'll spend a few minutes with as many people as I can, and we'll try and help you out. All right? Thanks, guys.